Sam Mitchell pressed his weathered hands against the frost-covered window of his modest ranch house, watching the blizzard tear across the Montana plains with a fury he hadn't seen in 20 years. The wind howled like a banshee, driving snow horizontally across his land, erasing fence lines and familiar landmarks beneath a blanket of white that seemed to stretch into eternity. At 68, Sam had weathered countless storms on his ranch outside Copper Falls. But something about this one felt different, ominous, as if the universe was preparing to deliver something that would change everything he thought he knew about his quiet, solitary life. What Sam couldn't possibly know was that buried somewhere in that raging snowstorm, two tiny heartbeats were fighting for survival. And in just a few hours, those heartbeats would transform his world in ways he never imagined possible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The blizzard of March 1983 would go down in Montana history as one of the worst on record. For 3 days, the storm had battered the northern plains, dropping nearly 4 feet of snow and creating drifts that towered over fence posts. The temperature had plummeted to 30 below zero, with wind chills that could kill an exposed person in minutes. Sam Mitchell stood in his kitchen, nursing his third cup of black coffee and watching the storm through the window. The coffee had gone cold long ago, but he held the mug anyway, finding comfort in its familiar weight. At 48, he was still a strong man, his 6-foot frame hardened by decades of ranch work, but the isolation of the past 2 years had aged him in ways that went beyond the silver threading through his dark hair. The house felt too quiet, too empty. It had been that way since Margaret died, leaving behind only memories and the echo of her laughter in rooms that now seemed to absorb sound rather than amplify it. Their dream of children had died with her, leaving Sam alone with 300 head of cattle and more loneliness than any man should have to bear. He'd lost 12 head already to the storm, found them frozen solid in the north pasture yesterday morning. The rest of his herd was huddled in the barn and the covered feeding areas he'd built over the years, but he worried about the stragglers, the ones too stubborn or too scared to come in when he'd called them. The radio crackled from its perch on the kitchen counter, the weather service repeating the same warnings they'd been broadcasting for days. No travel advised, stay indoors, check on elderly neighbors. The usual litany of precautions that folks in Montana knew by heart, but sometimes ignored to their peril. Sam was considering another trip to the barn to check on the cattle when he heard a sound that didn't belong to the storm. He paused, coffee mug halfway to his lips, straining to listen over the wind. There it was again, faint but unmistakable, the whine of an engine in distress. Setting down his mug, Sam pulled on his heavy coat and boots, grabbed his flashlight, and stepped out into the maelstrom. The cold hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath and immediately numbing his exposed cheeks. Snow stung his eyes and filled his nostrils with each breath, but he pushed forward, following the sound that was growing weaker by the minute. The engine noise was coming from the direction of County Road 47, the 2-lane highway that ran past his property. Sam knew that road was impassable, had been since the first day of the storm, but someone had apparently tried to make it through anyway. He trudged through knee-deep snow, his flashlight beam barely penetrating the swirling white curtain ahead of him. What he found made his blood run cold. A small sedan, barely visible beneath the snow, sat nose-deep in a drift about 50 yards from his front gate. The engine was still running, but barely, the exhaust pipe mostly buried and the headlights dim. Sam quickened his pace, his heart hammering as he imagined what he might find inside. The driver's side window was partially open, and through it, Sam could see a young woman slumped over the steering wheel. She wasn't moving. He yanked open the door, and she nearly fell into his arms unconscious, her lips blue with cold, her breathing shallow and rapid. She couldn't have been more than 25, with long auburn hair and delicate features that spoke of someone who'd never expected to find herself in such dire circumstances. But it was what he heard next that nearly stopped his heart, the faint sound of crying from the back seat. Sam's flashlight beam swept across the interior of the car, revealing 2 infant car seats. Inside them, wrapped in blankets that were doing little against the cold, were 2 babies. Twins by the look of them. No more than a few months old. They were crying weakly, their little voices barely audible over the storm. But they were alive. Without hesitation, Sam scooped up the unconscious woman and carried her toward his house, then immediately returned for the babies. The first trip through the deep snow nearly exhausted him, but adrenaline and desperation gave him strength he didn't know he still possessed. The babies felt impossibly light in his arms, their tiny bodies trembling with cold even through their blankets. Inside his house, Sam worked with the methodical efficiency of a man who'd dealt with emergencies before. He placed the woman on his sofa and covered her with every blanket he could find, then turned his attention to the babies. They were still crying, but it was the weak, hopeless sound of children at the edge of their endurance. The kitchen was the warmest room in the house, so Sam brought them there, setting their car seats on the table while he figured out what to do next. He'd never held a baby in his life. He and Margaret had never been blessed that way, but instinct took over. He carefully lifted one of the infants, a little girl with wispy blonde hair, and held her against his chest. She was so small, her entire body barely the length of his forearm. "Easy there, little one," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion he hadn't expected. "You're safe now." The other baby, a boy who looked identical to his sister, continued to cry in his car seat. Sam awkwardly managed to hold both infants, one in each arm, and was amazed when they both began to quiet. Maybe it was his body heat, or maybe they sensed they were finally safe, but their desperate wails faded to small whimpers, then to the steady breathing of exhausted sleep. The phone lines were down, had been since the second day of the storm, so Sam couldn't call for help. The woman on his sofa was breathing more steadily now, her color slowly returning as she warmed up, but she remained unconscious. He'd done what he could for her, covering her with blankets and positioning her near the fireplace where the heat would reach her, but the babies were his immediate concern. They would need food, warmth, and care that Sam had no idea how to provide. He'd raised cattle, fixed machinery, and survived 2 decades of Montana winters, but he'd never changed a diaper or prepared a bottle in his life. The car had been too buried for him to retrieve anything else before the storm worsened, but Sam made do with what he had. He warmed milk from his refrigerator, not ideal for infants, he knew, but better than nothing, and managed to get both babies to take small amounts from the tip of a clean spoon. It was clumsy and inefficient, but it seemed to help. Their tiny bodies felt warmer, their breathing more regular. As the night wore on, Sam found himself settling into a rhythm he'd never imagined. When one baby cried, he picked them up. When they seemed hungry, he tried to give them small amounts of warmed milk. When they soiled themselves, he fashioned makeshift diapers from dish towels and safety pins he'd found in Margaret's sewing basket, items he'd never thought to throw away. Though he'd had no use for them until now, the woman slept fitfully on the sofa, occasionally murmuring words Sam couldn't understand. He checked on her regularly, relieved to see her color continuing to improve, but she showed no signs of waking. Whatever had driven her out into the storm with 2 infants, it must have been desperate circumstances indeed. By dawn, the storm was finally beginning to weaken. The wind still howled, but with less ferocity, and the snow had decreased from the blinding wall of white it had been to something closer to heavy flakes. Sam had been awake all night, alternating between caring for the babies and tending to their mother, surviving on coffee and determination alone. The babies were sleeping peacefully now, curled together in a makeshift bed Sam had created using sofa cushions and blankets near the fireplace. They looked so small, so vulnerable, but they were breathing steadily and their skin felt warm to the touch. Looking at them, Sam felt something stirring in his chest that he hadn't experienced in years, a protective instinct so fierce it surprised him. He'd saved their lives. But as he watched them sleep in the growing light of dawn, Sam began to realize that maybe, just maybe, they were about to save his two. The woman on the sofa stirred as the morning light grew stronger, her eyelids fluttering as consciousness slowly returned. Sam sat in his armchair nearby, one eye on her and one on the babies, waiting to see what story would unfold when she finally woke up. Whatever had brought her to his door in the middle of a blizzard with two infants, he sensed it wasn't going to be simple. But as he looked at the peaceful faces of the sleeping twins, Sam Mitchell realized that after 2 years of crushing loneliness, he no longer felt alone. These tiny strangers had already changed something fundamental in his carefully ordered world, and he had the strangest feeling that his life would never be the same again. The storm was passing, but Sam suspected that the real adventure was just beginning. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The woman's eyes opened slowly, unfocused and filled with confusion as she struggled to orient herself in the unfamiliar surroundings. Sam had been dozing in his armchair when her movement caught his attention, and he immediately leaned forward, setting aside the coffee mug that had become his constant companion through the long night. "Easy there," Sam said gently, his voice soft so as not to startle her. "You're safe. You're in my house." She tried to sit up too quickly and immediately winced, pressing a hand to her head. Her auburn hair was disheveled and her face was pale, but her green eyes were alert now, darting around the room with growing alarm. "The babies," she whispered, her voice hoarse and panicked. "Where are? Right here," Sam assured her, gesturing toward the makeshift bed by the fireplace where the twins still slept peacefully. "They're fine, fed and warm and sleeping sound as can be." Relief flooded her features, and tears began streaming down her cheeks. She tried to stand, but her legs were too unsteady, and Sam was beside her in an instant, helping her remain upright. "Take it slow," he advised. "You were unconscious for hours. Hypothermia does things to a person's body that take time to recover from." She nodded, accepting his help as she made her way to where the babies lay. Kneeling beside them, she touched each tiny face with trembling fingers, as if confirming they were real and alive. The relief in her expression was so profound that Sam felt his own chest tighten with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered, looking up at him with eyes full of gratitude. "I thought we were going to die out there. I thought they were going to die. Because of my stupidity." "You're not stupid," Sam said firmly. "Sometimes life forces us into situations we never planned for. The important thing is you're all alive." She studied his weathered face, taking in the kindness in his gray eyes, the concern etched in the lines around them. "I'm Sarah," she said. "Finally, Sarah Bennett. And these are Emma and Ethan." "Sam Mitchell," he replied. "And this is my ranch. You're about 15 miles outside Copper Falls." Sarah's face crumpled at the mention of the town name. "Copper Falls," she repeated, as if the words caused her physical pain. "I was trying to get there. My sister lived there, but I found out yesterday that she's gone. Cancer. I didn't even know she was sick." The pieces were starting to come together for Sam. "You came all this way to see her?" "From Oregon," Sarah confirmed, wiping tears from her cheeks. "I had nowhere else to go. Lisa was my only family left, and when I got the letter from her lawyer saying she'd died and left me her house, it seemed like a sign. Like maybe we could start over somewhere." She gestured toward the babies, and Sam noticed for the first time how young she looked, barely more than a girl herself. "Their father left when he found out I was pregnant. Said he wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility. My parents disowned me when I refused to give them up for adoption. Lisa was the only one who still talked to me, who sent letters and pictures and told me I was welcome any time. The bitterness in her voice spoke of deep wounds that went far beyond the physical trauma of the night before. Sam found himself wanting to comfort her, this young woman who'd been carrying such a heavy burden alone. But the storm came out of nowhere, Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. The radio said it was just supposed to be light snow. I thought I could make it to Copper Falls before it got bad. I was so focused on getting there, on getting to Lisa's house, that I didn't pay attention to how quickly the weather was changing. She looked down at the twins, who were beginning to stir, tiny fists rubbing at their eyes as they woke up. When the car got stuck, I tried to keep the engine running for heat, but the snow kept piling up around the exhaust pipe. I was so scared they were going to suffocate, but I was afraid to turn off the engine because it was so cold. I must have passed out from the carbon monoxide. Sam felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Carbon monoxide poisoning could have killed all three of them if he hadn't found them when he did. The timing of his discovery seemed less like coincidence and more like divine intervention. You said your sister left you a house? Sam asked, changing the subject to something more positive. Sarah nodded, reaching into her jacket pocket and pulling out a crumpled envelope. The lawyer sent me the deed and the keys. It's on Elm Street, apparently. A small place, but it would have been perfect for us. We could have had a fresh start. Could have? Sam repeated. What's changed? Sarah's shoulders sagged. I spent every penny I had getting here. The car's probably totaled, and even if it's not, I don't have money for repairs. I don't know anyone in town. Don't have a job lined up. I thought Lisa would be there to help me figure things out, but now. She trailed off, the impossibility of her situation settling over her like a weight. Sam watched as she gently lifted Emma, who had started to fuss. The baby immediately quieted in her mother's arms, and Sam felt something twist in his chest at the sight. He'd held those babies through the night, fed them and comforted them, but they belonged with their mother. Still, the protective instinct they'd awakened in him hadn't faded with the dawn. The storm should be clear enough for travel by this afternoon, Sam said carefully. I can drive you into town, help you get settled in your sister's house. I can't pay you, Sarah said quickly. I can't pay for gas or impose on your kindness any more than I already have. Did I ask you to pay me? Sam replied, his tone gentle but firm. Sometimes folks help each other because it's the right thing to do, not because there's payment involved. Sarah stared at him as if such generosity was foreign to her experience. Why would you do that for strangers? Sam was quiet for a long moment, watching as Ethan began to wake up too, his tiny face scrunching up in preparation for crying. Without thinking, Sam reached over and lifted the baby, settling him against his shoulder with the natural ease he'd developed overnight. Ethan immediately calmed, apparently recognizing the scent and feel of the man who'd cared for him through his first crisis. My wife and I always wanted children, Sam said finally, his voice rough with old pain. Never happened for us. She died 2 years ago, and I've been living alone ever since, just me and the cattle. Finding you three last night, it reminded me what it feels like to be needed, to have a purpose beyond just surviving each day. Sarah's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they seemed to be tears of understanding rather than desperation. I'm sorry about your wife. Margaret would have loved having babies in the house, Sam continued, gently bouncing Ethan as the baby began to drift back to sleep. She'd have had you all fed and clothed and settled before you knew what hit you. She was good with people that way. She sounds wonderful. She was. Sam cleared his throat, pushing past the familiar ache that always accompanied thoughts of Margaret. Point is, helping you isn't charity. It's something I need to do as much as you need it done. Over the next few hours, as the storm finally exhausted itself and the sun began breaking through the clouds, Sam learned more about Sarah's story. She'd been working as a waitress in Portland when she got pregnant, living in a tiny apartment and barely making ends meet. The baby's father, a charming man named David, who'd swept her off her feet with promises of a future together, had disappeared the moment she'd told him about the pregnancy. Her parents, strict religious people who'd raised her to believe that unmarried pregnancy was a sin that brought shame on the entire family, had given her an ultimatum: give up the babies for adoption and come home, or never darken their door again. Sarah had chosen her children. "Lisa sent me money when she could," Sarah explained as she fed Emma with supplies Sam had improvised. Not much, because she was working as a seamstress and didn't make much herself. But she wrote letters every week, sent pictures of Copper Falls, told me about the neighbors and the little house she was renting. She made it sound like paradise. "It's a good town," Sam said honestly. "Small, but the people are decent. Your sister was well liked from what I remember. Quiet lady, kept to herself mostly, but she volunteered at the church and helped with the annual fundraiser for the volunteer fire department." Sarah's face brightened at this information about her sister. "That sounds like Lisa. She always put others first. When we were growing up, she was the one who took care of me when our parents were too busy with church activities to pay attention to what their daughters needed." As the afternoon wore on and Sam prepared to drive Sarah and the twins into town, he found himself reluctant to let them go. The house had felt alive again with their presence, filled with purpose and meaning it had lacked since Margaret's death. But Sarah was young and capable, and she deserved the chance to build the life she'd traveled so far to find. The drive to Copper Falls was quiet, with Sarah holding the babies and staring out the window at the snow-covered landscape. When they reached Elm Street, Sam helped her locate the small white house that had been her sister's home and was now hers. It was a modest place, but well-maintained, with a small yard and a front porch that would be perfect for sitting on summer evenings. Sam carried the babies while Sarah unlocked the door with shaking hands, and they stepped into what would be their new life. The house was clean and simply furnished, with evidence of Lisa's careful maintenance everywhere. There were even baby supplies in one of the bedrooms, a crib, changing table, and boxes of diapers and formula that Lisa must have purchased after receiving word of Sarah's planned arrival. "She was ready for us," Sarah whispered, tears flowing freely as she took in her sister's final gift. "Even sick, even dying, she was still taking care of me." As Sam prepared to leave, Sarah caught his hand. "I don't know how to thank you for what you've done. You saved our lives, and I'll never forget that." "You don't need to thank me," Sam replied, though he found it difficult to walk away. "But if you need anything at all, you know where to find me." As he drove back to his ranch through the clear, cold evening, Sam felt the familiar emptiness settling over him again. But this time, it was different. This time, he carried with him the memory of tiny heartbeats against his chest, and the knowledge that somewhere in Copper Falls, 3 people were alive because of choices he'd made. He had no way of knowing that this was just the beginning of a story that would span 2 decades, or that the babies he'd saved would one day return that kindness in ways he could never imagine. 3 weeks had passed since the blizzard, and Sam Mitchell found himself driving into Copper Falls more often than he had in the previous 2 years combined. He told himself it was just neighborly concern checking on Sarah and the twins, making sure they had everything they needed, helping with repairs around Lisa's old house. But the truth was more complicated than that. The twins were thriving. Emma had grown noticeably, her wispy blonde hair getting thicker and her blue eyes becoming more alert and curious with each passing day. Ethan was developing his own personality too, more serious than his sister, but quick to smile when Sam visited. Both babies seemed to remember him, reaching out their tiny hands whenever he appeared and settling immediately when he held them. But it was Sarah who worried Sam most. She'd thrown herself into making a life in Copper Falls with determination that bordered on desperation, taking on cleaning jobs for several families in town and working late into the night sewing alterations that barely paid enough to cover her basic expenses. She was exhausting herself, and Sam could see the toll it was taking. "You're wearing yourself too thin," Sam said one Thursday afternoon as he found Sarah at her kitchen table, surrounded by mending projects while the twins napped in their cribs. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hands shook slightly from fatigue as she worked. "I have to," Sarah replied without looking up from the torn dress she was repairing. "Mrs. Henderson needs this by tomorrow, and the Johnsons want their curtains hemmed by the weekend. The money from these jobs will just cover the heating bill." Sam watched her work, noting how her fingers moved with practiced skill despite her exhaustion. She'd inherited her sister's talent with a needle, but she was taking on too much work in her desperation to prove she could make it on her own. "What about that job at the general store?" Sam asked. "Didn't Tom Morrison say he might have something for you?" Sarah's face tightened. "He changed his mind. Said he couldn't risk hiring someone with no references, especially not a single mother with 2 babies. Too unreliable, he said." The bitterness in her voice made Sam's jaw clench. Tom Morrison was a decent man, but he was also cautious to a fault, and apparently Sarah's situation made him nervous. It wasn't fair, but it was reality in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. "There might be another option," Sam said carefully. He'd been thinking about this for days, weighing the pros and cons, trying to convince himself it was purely practical. "I could use help with the books at the ranch. Margaret used to handle all the paperwork, invoices, tax records, correspondence with the cattle buyers. I've been making a mess of it since she died." Sarah looked up sharply. "I don't know anything about ranch bookkeeping." "You can read and write and do arithmetic, can't you? That's more than some folks can manage. And you worked at that bank with your father. You said you helped with accounts there." "That was years ago, and I was just a clerk," Sarah protested. But Sam could see interest flickering in her tired eyes. "The work could be done mostly from here," Sam continued. "I'd bring the papers to you, you'd organize them and make sense of them, and I'd pay you a fair wage. More than you're making with the sewing, and steadier too." Sarah set down her needle and looked at him with the same searching expression she'd worn that first morning when she'd awakened in his house. "Why do you keep helping me?" It was a question Sam had been asking himself repeatedly. The simple answer was that he liked Sarah and the twins, that helping them filled a void in his life that had been empty too long. But there was more to it than that, something deeper that he wasn't quite ready to acknowledge even to himself. "Maybe because I need help as much as you do," he said finally. "The ranch is too much for one person to handle properly. I've been letting things slide since Margaret died, and that's not fair to the cattle or to her memory." Sarah studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but I want to do this properly. I want to learn to do it right, not just good enough to get by." "I wouldn't expect anything less," Sam replied, feeling a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the fire. Crackling in Sarah's small fireplace stopped the arrangement began the following week. Sam would arrive each morning with a box of receipts, invoices, and correspondence, and Sarah would spend the baby's nap times organizing everything into a system that actually made sense. What started as a few hours of work quickly expanded as Sarah discovered just how chaotic Sam's record-keeping had become. "How did you ever find anything in here?" Sarah asked one morning, gesturing to a shoebox full of random papers that Sam had brought her. "Some of these receipts are from 1981, mixed in with last month's feed bills." Sam had the grace to look embarrassed. "Margaret had a system. After she died, I just threw everything in boxes and hoped for the best." "Well, that stops now," Sarah said firmly, and Sam found himself smiling at her take-charge attitude. We're going to create a proper filing system, and you're going to use it." As the weeks passed, their arrangement evolved into something more than just employer and employee. Sam found excuses to linger when he dropped off paperwork, often arriving around lunchtime so Sarah would invite him to stay for a simple meal. He brought groceries more often than necessary, claiming he'd bought too much for one person. Sarah began asking his opinion on financial decisions for the ranch, and Sam was surprised by her shrewd insights into business matters. The twins were growing rapidly, and Sam became an unofficial part of their daily routine. He knew Emma preferred to be bounced gently when she was fussy, while Ethan liked to be walked around the house. He could tell the difference between their hungry cries and their tired cries, and both babies seemed to save their biggest smiles for his visits. "They think you're their grandfather," Sarah said one afternoon as she watched Sam successfully soothe both babies while she finished organizing his quarterly tax records. The comment hit Sam harder than Sarah could have known. At 58, he was old enough to be their grandfather, and the role fit him more naturally than he'd expected. But the word also highlighted the temporary nature of their arrangement. The fact that he was borrowing time with a family that wasn't really his. "Is that what you tell them?" Sam asked, trying to keep his voice light. "I tell them you're the man who saved their lives," Sarah replied softly. "The man who takes care of us when we need it most." Their comfortable routine was disrupted one cold February morning when Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Sam arrived with the weekly paperwork to find a well-dressed stranger sitting in Sarah's living room while she held both babies protectively in her arms. "Sam, this is Mr. David Cartwright," Sarah said, her voice tight with tension. "He says he's a lawyer from Portland." Cartwright stood and extended his hand, which Sam shook reluctantly. The man was younger than Sam, probably in his 30s, with the smooth confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. "Mr. Mitchell," Cartwright said, "I was just explaining to Miss Bennett that I represent the interests of my client, David Reeves, regarding these children." Sam felt every muscle in his body tense. "David Reeves?" "The biological father," Cartwright clarified. "Mr. Reeves has recently experienced a change in his personal circumstances and wishes to exercise his parental rights." Sarah's face had gone pale, and she held the twins closer. "He has no rights. He abandoned us. He wanted nothing to do with them." "The law sees it differently," Cartwright replied smoothly. "Mr. Reeves is prepared to offer financial support and a stable home environment. He's recently married a woman of good family and means, and they're eager to provide these children with opportunities that a single mother working odd jobs simply cannot match." The implications of the lawyer's words hit Sam like a physical blow. Sarah's worst nightmare was sitting in her living room, speaking in calm, reasonable tones about taking away the children she'd raised and protected through every challenge. "What does he want exactly?" Sam asked, his voice deadly quiet. "Custody," Cartwright said simply. "Mr. Reeves and his wife are prepared to take the children immediately and provide them with every advantage: private schools, college funds, social connections that will serve them well throughout their lives." "And what about their mother?" Sam demanded. Cartwright's expression didn't change. "Miss Bennett would be compensated for her expenses to date, of course. And she would be welcome to visit the children, within reason." "Visit?" Sarah's voice cracked. "They're my children. I've raised them from birth. I've been everything to them: mother, father, provider, protector." "A situation that was never meant to be permanent," Cartwright interrupted. "Mr. Reeves was young and overwhelmed when he learned of the pregnancy. He made a mistake in leaving, but he's prepared to correct that mistake now." Sam watched Sarah's face crumble as the reality of the situation sank in. David Reeves had money, social standing, and the law on his side. Sarah had nothing but love and determination, which might not be enough in a custody battle. "I need time to think," Sarah said finally. "I need to consult a lawyer of my own." "Of course," Cartwright agreed. But I should mention that Mr. Reeves is prepared to be generous with his settlement offer if this matter can be resolved quickly and amicably. Extended legal proceedings would be expensive for all parties involved, and not necessarily in the children's best interests. After Cartwright left, Sarah sat in stunned silence while the twins played on the floor at her feet, oblivious to the threat hanging over their small family. Sam wanted to offer comfort, solutions, promises that everything would be all right. But the truth was, he didn't know if anything would be all right ever again. "I can't lose them," Sarah whispered finally. "They're everything to me. Without them, I have nothing." Sam knelt beside her chair and took her hands in his. "You won't lose them. We'll find a way to fight this." "With what?" Sarah asked desperately. "I can barely afford groceries. How am I going to pay for a lawyer good enough to go up against someone like David?" Sam looked down at Emma and Ethan, these two tiny people who had become so important to him, and made a decision that would change all their lives. "With whatever it takes," he said firmly. "I won't let anyone take them away from you." "From us." The words slipped out before Sam could stop it, but once it was spoken, he realized it was the truth. Somewhere over the past few months, Sarah and the twins had become his family in all the ways that mattered. And he'd fight for them with everything he had. The law office of Rebecca Martinez was nothing like the sterile corporate environment that David Cartwright represented. Located above the town's only pharmacy, it consisted of 2 small rooms filled with legal books, case files, and the comfortable clutter of a lawyer who prioritized substance over appearance. Rebecca herself was a woman in her 40s who had returned to Copper Falls after practicing family law in Denver, drawn back by the slower pace and the opportunity to help people who couldn't afford big city legal fees. Sam sat beside Sarah in the cramped waiting room, watching as she nervously adjusted Emma's blanket while Ethan dozed in his car seat. 3 days had passed since Cartwright's visit. 3 days during which Sarah had barely slept or eaten, consumed by the fear of losing her children. "Mrs. Bennett?" Rebecca appeared in the doorway, a warm smile creasing her face despite the serious nature of their meeting. "Please come in. And you must be Mr. Mitchell." Sam had insisted on accompanying Sarah to this consultation, despite her protests that she couldn't afford to involve him in her legal troubles. The truth was, he couldn't stay away. The thought of Sarah facing this battle alone was unbearable. Rebecca's office was small but welcoming, with family photos on her desk and children's drawings taped to the walls, evidence of the clients she'd helped over the years. She settled behind her desk while Sam and Sarah took the chairs across from her, the twins quiet for the moment. "I've reviewed the documents Mr. Cartwright left with you," Rebecca began, her expression serious. "I won't sugarcoat this. David Reeves has significant advantages in any custody dispute. He's the biological father, he has substantial financial resources, and he's now married, which courts traditionally view favorably." Sarah's face crumpled slightly, but she maintained her composure. "What are my chances?" "Better than you might think," Rebecca replied, leaning forward. "The law has evolved significantly regarding unmarried fathers' rights. Simply being the biological father doesn't automatically grant custody, especially when that father abandoned his responsibilities for over a year. The courts now recognize that the best interests of the children are paramount." "What does that mean exactly?" Sam asked. "It means we need to demonstrate that Sarah has been the children's primary caregiver, that she's provided a stable, loving environment, and that removing them from her care would be detrimental to their well-being." Rebecca opened a legal pad and began making notes. "Tell me about your support system, Sarah. Family, friends, community connections." Sarah's shoulders sagged. "I don't have family besides Lisa, and she's gone. My parents disowned me when I refused to give up the babies. I haven't made many friends in town yet. I've been too busy working to really connect with people." "What about Mr. Mitchell?" Rebecca asked, glancing between them. You two seem close." The question hung in the air, loaded with implications that neither Sam nor Sarah had fully addressed. They'd grown closer over the months, certainly, but defining exactly what they meant to each other was complicated territory neither had been ready to explore. "Sam's been ... Sarah started, then paused, looking at him uncertainly. "I've been helping where I can," Sam said carefully. "Sarah works on my ranch books, and I check in on her and the twins regularly." Rebecca studied them both with the shrewd assessment of someone who'd seen every possible family configuration in her years of practice. "Are you romantically involved?" "No," Sarah said quickly, heat rising in her cheeks. "It's not like that. Sam's just been incredibly kind to us." "I see," Rebecca made another note. "The reason I ask is that marriage to a stable, established member of the community would significantly strengthen your position. Courts favor two-parent households, especially when one parent has deep local roots and financial stability." The suggestion settled over them like a weight. Sam felt his pulse quicken at the implications, while Sarah stared at her hands, clearly overwhelmed by the complexity of her situation. "But that's not something we need to discuss today," Rebecca continued diplomatically. "Let's focus on building the strongest case possible with your current circumstances. I'll need documentation of everything: medical records, receipts showing you've provided for the children's needs, testimony from people who've observed your parenting." Over the next hour, Rebecca outlined their legal strategy. They would argue that Sarah had been the children's sole caregiver since birth, that she'd made sacrifices to provide for them, and that David's sudden interest was motivated by convenience rather than genuine parental concern. It wasn't a guaranteed win, but it was a fighting chance. "I have to ask about fees," Sarah said as the meeting concluded, her voice small with embarrassment. "We'll work something out," Rebecca replied. "I believe in what we're fighting for here. These children belong with the mother who's raised them, not with a father who shows up after a year with a checkbook." As they left the office, Sam could see the weight of the situation pressing down on Sarah's shoulders. The legal battle ahead would be expensive, time-consuming, and emotionally devastating, with no guarantee of success. "I need to ask you something," Sarah said as they settled the twins into Sam's truck for the drive home. "And please be honest with me." Sam waited, sensing the importance of whatever she was about to say. "Do you think I'm being selfish?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "David can give them things I never could: private schools, college funds, opportunities I can't even imagine. Maybe they'd be better off with him." The question hit Sam like a physical blow. He turned to face her fully, taking her hands in his calloused ones. "Sarah, listen to me," he said firmly. "Money can't buy what you've given these children. Love, dedication, sacrifice, those aren't things you can purchase. You've been their whole world since the day they were born. You're the one who gets up with them at night, who knows that Emma likes her bottle warmed just so, and that Ethan needs to be held a certain way when he's fussy. You're their mother in every way that matters." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she absorbed his words. But what if it's not enough? What if the court decides that having two parents with money is better than one parent with love? "Then we'll prove them wrong," Sam stated with quiet conviction. "We'll show them what a real family looks like." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Rebecca worked tirelessly to build their case, gathering testimonials from Dr. Wilson, who'd been treating the twins since their arrival in Copper Falls, and from several townspeople who'd observed Sarah's devoted parenting. Meanwhile, David Cartwright continued to pressure them for a quick settlement, increasing his financial offers while making veiled threats about the expense and uncertainty of a court battle. The pressure was taking its toll on Sarah. She was losing weight, barely sleeping, and her hands shook constantly from stress. Sam found himself spending more time at her house, helping with the twins and household chores, trying to provide stability in the midst of chaos. It was during one of these visits that Sarah received the call that changed everything. Sam was feeding Ethan while Sarah balanced Emma on her hip and stirred a pot of soup on the stove when the phone rang. She answered with her free hand, expecting it to be Rebecca with an update on their case preparation. "Sarah Bennett speaking," she said, then froze as an unfamiliar voice responded. Sam watched her face drain of color as she listened, her grip on Emma tightening protectively. The conversation was brief, mostly consisting of Sarah saying, "Yes, and I understand," in increasingly strained tones. "What was that about?" Sam asked after she hung up. "David's in town," Sarah said, her voice hollow. "He wants to meet the children. His lawyer says it will look better in court if he can demonstrate that he's trying to establish a relationship with them." The thought of David Reeves, the man who'd abandoned Sarah when she needed him most, walking into their home and playing father to the children Sam had helped raise, made his blood boil. "You don't have to let him," Sam said firmly. "Yes, I do," Sarah replied, sinking into a chair with Emma still in her arms. "Rebecca said refusing would make me look uncooperative, like I'm trying to keep the children from their father out of spite. It could hurt our case." Sam wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that some things were more important than legal strategy. But he could see the defeat in Sarah's posture, the way this battle was wearing her down piece by piece. The meeting was scheduled for the following afternoon. David arrived precisely on time, accompanied by Cartwright and a woman Sam assumed was his new wife. David was everything Sam had expected: tall, well-dressed, conventionally handsome in the way that suggested he'd never faced real hardship. His wife, introduced as Patricia, was elegant and soft-spoken, with the kind of refined beauty that came from a lifetime of privilege. "Sarah," David said as she opened the door, his voice carrying a false warmth that made Sam's jaw clench. "You look well." "David," Sarah replied stiffly, stepping aside to let them enter. "The children are in the living room." Sam watched from the kitchen doorway as David approached the twins, who were playing on a blanket on the floor. Emma looked up at the stranger with curious eyes, while Ethan continued to focus on the colorful blocks he'd been stacking. "They're beautiful," Patricia said softly, kneeling beside them. "They look just like you, David." "I can see my mother in Emma's face," David agreed, reaching out to touch the little girl's cheek. Emma pulled back slightly, turning to look for Sarah with the wariness that young children show toward unfamiliar people. "She's shy with strangers," Sarah explained, moving closer to the twins. "I'm not a stranger," David said, a slight edge creeping into his voice. "I'm their father." The tension in the room was palpable. Sam watched as David tried to engage with the children, picking up Emma despite her obvious discomfort and attempting to get Ethan's attention. The twins' reactions were telling. They remained polite but distant, clearly preferring Sarah's familiar presence to these well-dressed strangers. "They'll warm up to us," Patricia said diplomatically as Emma began to fuss and reach for Sarah. "Children just need time to adjust." "Of course they will," David agreed, but Sam could see frustration flickering in his eyes. He'd expected the children to be instantly drawn to him, and their indifference was clearly not part of his plan. The visit lasted an hour, during which David attempted to establish some kind of connection with Emma and Ethan, while Patricia observed everything with calculating eyes. Sam remained in the background, but his presence clearly irritated David, who finally addressed him directly. "You're the rancher, right?" David said, his tone dismissive. "Sarah mentioned you've been helpful." "I've tried to be," Sam replied evenly, recognizing the challenge in the younger man's voice. "Well, that won't be necessary much longer," David continued. "Once the children are with Patricia and me, Sarah won't need to impose on the kindness of strangers." The casual dismissal of everything Sam had done for Sarah and the twins, the reduction of their relationship to mere charity, ignited something fierce in Sam's chest. But before he could respond, Sarah stepped forward. "Sam isn't a stranger," she said firmly, surprising everyone in the room, including Sam himself. He's family. He's been more of a father to these children than... She stopped herself, but the implication hung heavy in the air. David's face darkened. I think this visit has gone on long enough, he said coldly. Cartwright will be in touch about next steps. After they left, Sarah collapsed into tears, the stress and emotion of the encounter finally overwhelming her. Sam held her while she cried, feeling her small frame shake with the force of her sobs. Did you see how they looked at everything? She whispered against his chest, like they were taking inventory, like they were already planning how to change everything, how to erase me from their lives. Sam tightened his arms around her, his own emotions churning. The battle for Emma and Ethan was intensifying, and he was beginning to realize that winning might require sacrifices none of them were prepared to make. The custody hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks away when Sam made a decision that surprised even him. He'd been wrestling with Rebecca's suggestion about marriage for days, turning it over in his mind while he worked the ranch, trying to separate practical necessity from the deeper feelings. He'd been afraid to acknowledge. It was a crisp morning in early April when he found himself standing on Sarah's front porch with a handful of wildflowers he'd picked along the creek, feeling more nervous than he had since he'd courted Margaret 30 years earlier. The twins were playing in their high chairs, banging spoons against bowls while Sarah tried to feed them breakfast, and the domestic scene made his heart ache with longing. Sam, Sarah said, opening the door with Emma balanced on her hip. You're early today. I haven't finished yesterday's invoices yet. Actually, I didn't come about the books, Sam said, his carefully rehearsed words suddenly abandoning him. I came to talk to you about something else. Sarah studied his face, noting the unusual tension in his expression, the flowers clutched in his weathered hands. Is everything all right? Sit down, Sam said gently, following her into the kitchen where Ethan was systematically dropping pieces of toast onto the floor. Please. Sarah settled Emma back into her high chair and turned to face him, worry creasing her brow. Sam took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to say would change everything between them, one way or another. I've been thinking about what Rebecca said, he began, his voice rougher than usual. About marriage helping your case. Sarah's cheeks flushed pink. Sam, you don't need to. Hear me out, he interrupted gently. This isn't just about the custody battle, though that's part of it. These past months, having you and the twins in my life, it's made me realize how empty everything was before. You've brought light back into a house that felt like a tomb. He paused, watching as Sarah's eyes filled with tears she was trying not to shed. I know this isn't conventional, Sam continued. I know I'm older than you, that I'm set in my ways, that I can't offer you the kind of romance a young woman deserves. But I can offer you partnership, protection, and love not just for you, but for Emma and Ethan too. They've become my children every way that matters, and I want to make that legal and permanent. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for a dish towel, wiping at her eyes. You want to marry me to help win the custody case. I want to marry you because I love you, Sam said simply, the words surprising him with their truth. All 3 of you. The custody case just makes it more urgent. The kitchen fell silent except for the twins' cheerful babbling and the tick of the old clock on the wall. Sarah stared at Sam as if seeing him for the first time, her mind clearly racing through the implications of his proposal. I care about you too, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. More than I should, maybe, but marriage is... It's permanent, Sam. What happens after we win the case? What happens when the immediate crisis is over and we're left with vows we made for the wrong reasons? Sam moved closer, taking her hands in his. What if they're not the wrong reasons? What if this is just life forcing us to acknowledge something that was already growing between us? Sarah searched his face, looking for any sign of doubt or uncertainty. What she found instead was steady conviction and a love so genuine it took her breath away. "The twins barely know David," she said, thinking aloud. "But they light up when they see you. Emma reaches for you before she reaches for me sometimes, and Ethan falls asleep easier in your arms than anywhere else. They're my children," Sam repeated firmly. "Maybe not by blood, but by choice. By love, by every sleepless night and every worry and every moment of joy they've given me." Emma chose that moment to throw her spoon onto the floor with a delighted shriek, and both adults turned to look at her. She grinned at them with her 4 tiny teeth, completely oblivious to the life-changing conversation happening around her. "All right," Sarah said finally, her voice gaining strength. "Yes, I'll marry you, Sam Mitchell." The relief that flooded through Sam was overwhelming. He pulled Sarah into his arms, holding her tight while the twins clapped their hands as if celebrating with them. "But I have conditions," Sarah said, pulling back to meet his eyes. "If we do this, it has to be real. Not just a legal arrangement, but a real marriage. I won't live a lie, and I won't have the twins growing up in a house where their parents are just pretending to care about each other. It will be real," Sam promised, cupping her face in his hands. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Methodist Church in Copper Falls. Rebecca Martinez served as Sarah's matron of honor, while Dr. Wilson stood up for Sam. The twins, dressed in matching white outfits that Sam had insisted on buying, sat in the front pew with Mrs. Henderson from the general store watching over them. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. Sam's voice was steady as he promised to love and protect Sarah and her children for the rest of his life. Sarah's vows brought tears to the eyes of everyone present as she spoke about finding home and family when she'd thought all hope was lost. After the ceremony, the small group gathered at Sam's ranch for a simple reception. The house, which had felt empty and cold for so long, was filled with laughter and conversation as their friends celebrated the new family. Sam watched Sarah move through their home now, with Emma in her arms while Ethan toddled around exploring his new surroundings, and felt a contentment he hadn't experienced since Margaret's death, but their happiness was short-lived. 3 days after the wedding, David Cartwright arrived with a court order for an emergency custody hearing. "This changes nothing," he said coldly as he served Sam with the papers. "If anything, it demonstrates Miss Bennett's desperation. Marrying a stranger for legal advantage won't impress Judge Morrison." "Mr. Mitchell isn't a stranger," Sarah replied, her wedding ring catching the light as she held Emma protectively. "He's been part of our lives for over a year." "A year?" Cartwright scoffed. "My client is the biological father. That trumps any convenient arrangement you've made." After he left, Sam and Sarah sat at their kitchen table, reading through the legal documents with growing alarm. David's lawyers were arguing that Sarah's sudden marriage proved she was unstable and manipulative, willing to use anyone to keep the children from their rightful father. "They're making it sound like I seduced you into marriage," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "Like I used the twins to trap you into this situation." "Let them try," Sam said grimly. "Anyone who knows us will see through that nonsense." But as they prepared for the hearing, it became clear that David's legal team had done their homework. They'd interviewed people in town, looking for any evidence that the marriage was a sham or that Sam and Sarah barely knew each other. They'd even spoken to Tom Morrison at the general store, who'd made unfortunate comments about Sarah being desperate and Sam being lonely. "They're going to make us look like frauds," Sarah said after Rebecca briefed them on David's strategy. "Two people who barely knew each other entering into a marriage of convenience. Then we prove them wrong," Rebecca replied. "We show the court what a real family looks like. We demonstrate the genuine affection between you and Sam, and most importantly, we let the judge see how the twins respond to both households." The night before the hearing, Sam and Sarah lay in bed, They'd been sharing the master bedroom since their wedding, though their physical relationship was still developing, slowly talking quietly about their fears and hopes. What if we lose? Sarah whispered in the darkness. What if the judge decides that David can provide a better life for them? We won't lose, Sam said, though uncertainty gnawed at him too. But if the worst happens, we'll appeal. We'll fight until there's nothing left to fight with. Sarah turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the moonlight streaming through the window. Do you ever regret it? Marrying me, taking on this battle? Sam reached out to touch her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. The only thing I regret is not telling you I loved you sooner. The only thing I regret is that we're having to fight for what should be ours by right. The custody hearing began at 9 o'clock the next morning in Judge Morrison's courtroom. David and Patricia. Saturday with their legal team on one side, both dressed impeccably and projecting an image of successful, stable parenthood. Sam and Sarah sat with Rebecca on the other side, Sam in his only suit and Sarah in a simple dress that emphasized her youth and the financial disparity between the two families. Judge Morrison was a fair man in his 60s who'd been presiding over family court cases for over 20 years. He listened carefully as both sides presented their arguments, asking pointed questions that made it clear he understood the complexities of the situation. David's lawyers painted a picture of a young woman who'd used pregnancy to trap their client, then refused reasonable offers of support in favor of a dramatic custody battle. They emphasized David's financial resources, his stable marriage, and his desire to provide his children with every possible advantage. Rebecca countered by focusing on Sarah's unwavering dedication to the twins, her sacrifices to provide for them, and the stable family environment she'd created with Sam. She called witnesses who testified to Sarah's character and to the obvious bond between Sam and the children. The moment of truth came when Judge Morrison asked to observe the twins with both potential families. David and Patricia took Emma and Ethan into a playroom while court officials watched and took notes. The twins were polite but distant, clearly uncomfortable with these relative strangers despite David's best efforts to engage them. When it was Sam and Sarah's turn, the difference was immediately apparent. Emma ran to Sam with delighted squeals, while Ethan crawled directly to Sarah and pulled himself up on her legs. The court reporter noted every interaction, every smile, every natural gesture of affection between the family. But as they left the courthouse that afternoon, waiting for Judge Morrison's decision, none of them could predict which way the ruling would go. David had law and money on his side. Sam and Sarah had love and history with the children. In 3 days, they would learn which the court valued more. The 3 days waiting for Judge Morrison's decision felt like 3 years. Sam threw himself into ranch work with unusual intensity, fixing fences that didn't need fixing and reorganizing the barn for the 3rd time that week. Sarah kept busy with the twins and her bookkeeping, but both adults moved through their daily routines like people walking underwater, every action muffled by the weight of uncertainty. On Thursday morning, Rebecca called with the news they'd been desperately hoping for. "We won," she said simply, and Sam heard Sarah's sharp intake of breath as she listened on the kitchen extension. Judge Morrison ruled that the children's best interests are served by remaining with their established family unit. David's parental rights are acknowledged, but he'll have supervised visitation only 1 weekend per month and 2 weeks during the summer. Sarah sank into a chair, tears streaming down her face as the reality sank in. Emma and Ethan would stay home. They would remain a family. What about appeals? Sam asked, ever practical even in the midst of relief. David's team can try, but Judge Morrison's ruling was thorough and well-reasoned. He specifically noted the children's obvious attachment to you and Sarah and the stability you've provided. He also wasn't impressed by David's sudden interest in fatherhood after more than a year of absence. After they hung up, Sam and Sarah held each other in their kitchen while the twins played at their feet, both adults shaking with relief and exhaustion. They'd won, but the victory felt fragile, as if it might disappear if they celebrated too loudly. The next few months brought a different kind of challenge. David exercised his visitation rights with rigid determination, arriving exactly on time for his scheduled weekends and maintaining a cold politeness that made everyone uncomfortable. Patricia tried to warm up to the twins, but her efforts felt forced, and Emma and Ethan remained wary around both of them. "They're not bonding with us the way we hoped," Patricia confided to Sarah during one particularly awkward pickup. "David thought once we had regular time with them, they'd start to see us as family." Sarah felt an unexpected pang of sympathy for the woman who'd been cast as the villain in their drama. "It takes time," she said diplomatically. "They're still very young." But privately, Sarah could see that David's relationship with the twins was purely transactional. He went through the motions of fatherhood during his visits, taking them to expensive restaurants they were too young to appreciate, buying them toys they didn't need, but there was no genuine connection, no understanding of their individual personalities or needs. It was during one of these visitation weekends that everything changed. Sam was checking the cattle in the north pasture when he saw smoke rising from the direction of town. Living in rural Montana, he knew that smoke could mean anything from a controlled burn to a house fire. So he saddled his horse and rode toward the source to see if help was needed. What he found made his blood run cold. The smoke was coming from the direction of Highway 2, where a semi-truck had jackknifed across both lanes. Cars were scattered at odd angles, and Sam could see people moving around the wreckage. But it was the small red sedan crushed beneath the trailer that made his heart stop. He recognized David's car immediately. Sam spurred his horse forward, pulling out his cell phone to call 911 as he rode. Emergency vehicles were already on scene, but the situation was clearly serious. He could see paramedics working frantically around the sedan, and his trained eye told him the rescue was not going well. By the time Sam reached the scene, they were loading Patricia into an ambulance. She was conscious but clearly badly injured, her face pale with shock. David was nowhere to be seen, and Sam's stomach clenched with dread as he realized why. "Where are the children?" he asked the first paramedic he could reach. The man's expression was grave. "Two small children, about 18 months old. They're being taken to Mercy General by helicopter. Critical condition." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Sam grabbed the paramedic's arm. "I'm their stepfather. My wife needs to know." "Go," the paramedic said. "We'll handle things here." The drive to the hospital was the longest of Sam's life. He called Sarah from the road, struggling to keep his voice steady as he explained what had happened. Her anguished cry when he told her about the twins' injuries nearly broke his heart. "I'm coming," she said. "I'll get a ride from Rebecca. Just stay with them, Sam. Don't let them be alone." The helicopter had already arrived when Sam reached Mercy General. He found Sarah in the emergency waiting room, her face white with terror as she clutched her purse like a lifeline. Rebecca sat beside her, one arm around her shoulders in comfort. "Any word?" Sam asked, pulling Sarah into his arms. "They won't tell us anything yet," Rebecca said. "The children are in surgery, both of them." The next few hours were a nightmare of waiting and praying. Doctors came and went with updates that were either too technical to understand or too vague to provide real comfort. Emma had suffered a serious head injury and was in surgery to relieve pressure on her brain. Ethan had internal injuries and a broken arm, but his prognosis was better. David had been killed instantly when the semi's trailer collapsed onto his car. Patricia was in stable condition with multiple fractures, but would recover. The twins had been in the back seat, protected by their car seats, but still critically injured by the impact. If they'd been in the front seat, One doctor said, then stopped himself. The implication was clear. The car seats had saved their lives. It was nearly midnight when they finally received word that both children were stable. Emma's surgery had been successful, though she would need extensive monitoring in the coming days. Ethan was awake and asking for Mama and Papa Sam. Sarah broke down completely when she heard this, the stress and terror of the day finally overwhelming her. Sam held her while she sobbed, his own emotions churning between relief and anguish. "They're alive," he whispered into her hair. "They're going to be all right." The twins spent 2 weeks in the hospital, with Sam and Sarah taking turns at their bedside around the clock. The children were confused and frightened by their injuries and the unfamiliar environment, but they drew comfort from their parents' constant presence. Emma's recovery was slower due to her head injury. For several days, she seemed not to recognize them, staring blankly when they spoke to her. But gradually, her personality began to emerge again, first a tentative smile when Sam sang her favorite lullaby, then excited clapping when Sarah brought her favorite stuffed animal from home. Ethan bounced back more quickly, though his broken arm made him frustrated and cranky. He wanted to be held constantly, and both Sam and Sarah took turns carrying him around the pediatric ward when he became restless. "You're lucky to have such devoted parents," one of the nurses commented as she watched Sam patiently help Ethan eat his lunch one-handed. "A lot of children don't get this kind of attention, even when they're healthy." The comment made Sam think about David, who would never have the chance to develop a real relationship with his children. Despite everything, Sam felt a pang of sadness for the man who died before learning to be a true father. Patricia visited once while the twins were still hospitalized. She was in a wheelchair, her leg in a cast and her face still bearing the marks of her injuries. The meeting was awkward and painful for everyone involved. "I keep thinking about what David said," she told Sarah quietly while Sam was helping Emma with a puzzle. "He said they would warm up to us eventually, that we just needed more time." Sarah didn't know how to respond. David would never have that time now, and Patricia was facing the reality that her connection to the children had died with her husband. "I won't contest the custody arrangement," Patricia continued. "David's parents might, but I won't fight you. These children belong with you and Sam. Anyone can see that." True to her word, Patricia signed papers relinquishing any claim to the twins before leaving town to recover with her own family. David's parents, grief-stricken and angry, initially threatened legal action, but their lawyer advised them that they had no standing given the previous court ruling, and the children's obvious attachment to Sam and Sarah. When Emma and Ethan finally came home from the hospital, the house felt different somehow. The crisis had stripped away any remaining pretense about their family arrangement. They were no longer a convenience marriage or a custody strategy. They were a family forged by love and tested by tragedy. Emma's head injury left her with some developmental delays that would require ongoing therapy, but her doctors were optimistic about her long-term prognosis. Ethan recovered completely from his physical injuries, though he became more clingy and anxious about separations. "They're going to need counseling," Dr. Wilson explained during a follow-up visit. "Children their age can't fully understand what happened, but they know something traumatic occurred. We'll need to watch for signs of anxiety or regression." Sam and Sarah threw themselves into the twins' recovery with the same determination they'd shown during the custody battle. They learned about brain injury rehabilitation, attended parenting classes focused on trauma recovery, and restructured their daily routines to provide maximum stability and comfort for the children. Slowly, life began to return to a new normal. Emma's speech developed more slowly than typical, but she was bright and eager to learn. Ethan became Sam's shadow, following him around the ranch and mimicking his every movement. Both children thrived in the love and security of their established home. On the first anniversary of the accident, Sam and Sarah visited David's grave with flowers. It felt important to acknowledge the man who had given life to the children they loved, even if his relationship with them had been complicated. "Do you think he would have learned to love them the way we do?" Sarah asked as they stood in the quiet cemetery. Sam considered the question carefully. "Maybe people can change. But the important thing is that Emma and Ethan are loved now, completely and unconditionally. That's what matters." As they drove home that evening, with the twins sleeping in their car seats and the sun setting over the Montana plains, Sam reflected on how much their lives had changed since that blizzard 4 years earlier. What had started as a rescue mission had become the greatest blessing of his life. The children he'd saved from the storm had saved him in return, bringing love and purpose back to a life that had felt finished. Now, as they faced the future together as a real family, Sam knew that the best chapters of their story were still to be written. 10 years had passed since the accident, and the Mitchell Ranch had transformed from a quiet cattle operation into something much more vibrant. The house that had once echoed with loneliness now rang with the sounds of children's laughter, homework discussions, and the organized chaos of a busy family life. Emma, now 12, had overcome most of the challenges. From her head injury through years of dedicated therapy and her own fierce determination. Though she still struggled with some learning disabilities, she developed into a thoughtful, artistic child with an uncanny ability to gentle even the most stubborn cattle. Her room was filled with sketches of ranch life, detailed drawings of horses, landscapes, and family moments that showed a maturity beyond her years. Ethan, also 12 but born 20 minutes after his sister, had grown into his father's shadow in every sense. Taller than Emma and built sturdy like Sam, he could rope a calf, fix a fence, and read the weather with the instincts of someone born to ranch life. His earlier anxiety had evolved into a protective nature toward his family, especially Emma, whose struggles he seemed to understand without words. "Dad, the south pasture fence is down again," Ethan reported as he hung up his hat in the mudroom after his morning chores. At 12, he never called Sam anything but Dad, and the title still made Sam's heart swell every time he heard it. "How bad?" Sam asked, looking up from the ranch ledgers that Sarah still helped him maintain. Though their operation had grown considerably over the years, 3 posts snapped clean through, probably from that storm last week. But the cattle are still contained. They're bunched up near the water tank. Sam nodded approvingly. Ethan's observation skills had developed remarkably, and he could assess situations with the calm competence of someone much older. It was a trait that served him well both on the ranch and in school, where teachers frequently commented on his natural leadership abilities. "We'll fix it after lunch," Sam decided. "Emma, you want to come help with the fencing?" Emma looked up from her sketchbook where she'd been drawing her mother making breakfast. "Can I bring my camera? Mrs. Peterson says I need more outdoor shots for the photography club." "Course you can," Sam replied, ruffling her hair as he passed. Emma had discovered photography the previous year and shown a natural talent for capturing moments that others might miss. Her pictures of ranch life had even been featured in the local newspaper. This was their rhythm. Now work and school and family time blending together in the comfortable patterns of people who knew their place in the world. Sarah had become the unofficial ranch manager over the years, her organizational skills and business sense helping Sam expand their operation from 300 head of cattle to nearly 800. They'd also added a small horse breeding program after Emma had shown exceptional skill with the animals, but it was their evening ritual that Sam treasured most. After dinner, when the day's work was done and homework was finished, the family would gather in the living room. Emma would sketch or work on photography projects, while Ethan read, usually books about ranching techniques or Western history. Sarah would mend clothes or plan menus, and Sam would review the next day's schedule or simply watch his family with quiet contentment. "Mom," Emma said one evening as she worked on a charcoal drawing of the barn, "Mrs. Henderson asked me something weird today." Sarah looked up from the shirt she was mending. What kind of weird? She asked if I remembered my real father. I told her you and Dad are my real parents, but she said I mean my biological father. Why would she ask that? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sam and Sarah had always been honest with the twins about their history, explaining in age-appropriate terms that Sarah was their birth mother and Sam had married her when they were babies. They'd never hidden the fact that there had been another man involved, but they'd also never emphasized it. Some people think biology is the only thing that makes family, Sarah said carefully. But you know better than that. Family is about love and commitment and choosing to take care of each other every day. Like how Dad chose us, Ethan added matter-of-factly, not looking up from his book about cattle breeding. And how we choose him back. The simple statement made Sam's throat tight with emotion. Even after all these years, his children's casual acceptance of their family structure still moved him. To them, there was nothing unusual about their story. Sam was their father because he'd always been their father, from their earliest memories. That's exactly right, Sarah confirmed. And don't let anyone tell you different. But the incident made Sam realize that as the twins grew older, questions about their origins would become more frequent and more complex. He and Sarah needed to prepare for conversations they'd been able to avoid while the children were younger. The opportunity came sooner than expected. 2 weeks later, Emma came home from school, unusually quiet, spending the afternoon in her room instead of helping with chores or working on her photography. When she missed dinner, something that never happened, Sarah went to check on her. "Emma, sweetheart, what's wrong?" Emma was lying on her bed, staring at the ceiling with tears tracking down her cheeks. "Jenny Morrison said some things at school today." Sarah's heart clenched. Jenny was Tom Morrison's daughter, a year older than Emma, and known for her sharp tongue and cruel observations. "What kind of things?" "She said everyone knows I'm not really Dad's daughter. She said my real father was rich and educated, and if he hadn't died, I'd be living in a mansion instead of on a smelly ranch." Emma's voice cracked. "She said Dad only married you because he felt sorry for us." The cruelty of children never ceased to amaze Sarah, though she knew Jenny was probably just repeating things she'd overheard from adults. Still, the words had clearly wounded Emma deeply. "Look at me," Sarah said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "What Jenny said is wrong. Completely wrong. Your father, your real father, who was Sam Mitchell, didn't marry me out of pity. He married me because he loves us. All of us. But is it true about the other man, the biological father?" Sarah took a deep breath. This was the conversation she'd been dreading and preparing for in equal measure. Yes, there was another man. His name was David, and he was your biological father. But Emma, honey, biology doesn't make someone a parent. Love does. Commitment does. Being there every day does. "Was he really rich?" Emma asked in a small voice. "He had money, yes. But money doesn't make someone a good parent. Your dad, Sam, has given you something much more valuable than money. He's given you security, love, and a home where you're cherished exactly as you are." Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. "Do I look like him, the biological father?" "A little," Sarah admitted. "You have his eyes. But you have my stubborn streak and your dad's gentle heart. You're your own person, Emma, made up of all the people who love you." That evening, Sam found Emma in the barn, sitting in the hayloft with her sketchbook. She'd drawn a picture of their family, Sam, Sarah, herself, and Ethan standing in front of the ranch house with the mountains in the background. It was detailed and loving, capturing not just their physical likenesses but something essential about their connection to each other. "That's beautiful," Sam said, settling beside her on the hay bales. "Mom told me about David," Emma said without preamble. "My biological father." Sam's chest tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "What do? You want to know? Did you know him?" "I met him once, yes." when he came to see you and Ethan." Emma was quiet, her pencil moving absently across the paper. "Mom said he had money." "He did. Do you think I would have been happier with him?" The question nearly broke Sam's heart. He turned to face Emma fully, needing her to see the truth in his eyes. "I think you would have been different," he said honestly. "You might have had fancier clothes or gone to expensive schools. But happiness? Emma, happiness comes from being loved for who you are, not what you can buy or where you live." "I'm happy here," Emma said firmly, "even when Jenny Morrison says mean things. This is where I belong." "Yes, you do," Sam agreed, pulling her into a side hug. "You belong here with us forever and always." The incident with Jenny Morrison was a turning point for both twins. Instead of being shaken by questions about their origins, they seemed to draw strength from understanding their story more completely. Ethan, ever practical, declared that David didn't sound like much of a father anyway, since he'd left when they were babies. Emma began incorporating elements of their family history into her art, creating a photo essay about chosen families that won a statewide competition. As summer approached, marking 13 years since the blizzard that had brought them together, Sam reflected on how much their lives had changed. The ranch was thriving, Sarah had become an integral part of the local business community, and the twins were growing into remarkable young people with strong values and clear senses of self. But perhaps most importantly, they'd created something that transcended the circumstances of their beginning. They'd built a family based on choice, commitment, and daily acts of love. The twins had never known a day when they weren't wanted, cherished, and supported, and that foundation showed in everything they did. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found us that night?" Emma asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Sam considered the question seriously. "I'd probably still be a lonely old man rattling around in an empty house, too stubborn to admit I needed help with anything, and we'd probably be." Emma trailed off, not wanting to imagine that alternative. "But we'll never have to know," Sam said firmly, "because we found each other when we needed each other most. And that's what matters." As the stars came out over the Montana sky, the Mitchell family settled into their evening routine, secure in the knowledge that they'd built something lasting and true. The twins were no longer the helpless infants Sam had rescued from a snowstorm. They were thriving young people with bright futures ahead of them. But their story was far from over. In fact, the most important chapter was still to come. The years between 12 and 18 passed in the way that teenage years do, simultaneously crawling and flying, filled with growth spurts and growing pains, triumphs and heartbreaks that felt monumental in the moment. The Mitchell family weathered it all together, their bond deepening rather than fraying under the pressures that often tear families apart. Emma had blossomed into a young woman of remarkable strength and grace. Her early learning challenges had taught her patience and resilience that served her well as she navigated high school. She'd become the unofficial historian of Copper Falls, using her photography and artistic skills to document the stories of older residents, particularly the ranching families whose way of life was slowly changing with modernization. Her senior project was a photo essay called Roots and Wings, a collection of portraits paired with interviews that captured the essence of what it meant to belong somewhere. The centerpiece was a stunning black and white photograph of Sam, standing in the doorway of their barn at dawn, his weathered hands holding a newborn calf, with the Montana mountains rising behind him like a cathedral. "This is my father," the caption read. "Not by blood, but by choice. He taught me that family isn't about where you come from, but about who stands beside you when the storms come." Ethan had grown into his father's equal in all aspects of ranch work, despite being only 18. At 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and calloused hands that spoke of years of honest labor, he could have passed for Sam's biological son to anyone who didn't know their story. But more than physical resemblance, he'd inherited Sam's quiet strength, his ability to make difficult decisions under pressure, and his unwavering commitment to protecting what mattered most. The twins were graduating high school in a month, and college acceptance letters had been arriving steadily. Emma had been offered a full scholarship to study photography and journalism at the University of Montana, while Ethan had received offers from several agricultural colleges, including a prestigious program in ranch management at Colorado State. But it was the conversation that took place on a cold February morning that would define their future more than any acceptance letter. Sam had been feeling poorly for weeks, tired in a way that rest didn't help, short of breath after tasks that had never winded him before. Sarah had been urging him to see Dr. Wilson, but Sam had stubbornly insisted it was just the normal aches and pains of a man approaching 70. The morning he collapsed while feeding the cattle, Ethan was there to catch him. "Dad," Ethan's voice carried across the ranch yard, panic threading through his usual calm composure. "Mom, come quick." Sarah ran from the house, her heart stopping when she saw Sam on the ground, his face gray and his breathing labored. Emma appeared from the barn where she'd been photographing the new foals, her camera forgotten as she knelt beside her father. "Call 911, Sarah ordered, her nursing training from years of ranch emergencies taking over. "Emma, get the oxygen tank from the supply shed. Ethan, help me get him into the truck. We're not waiting for the ambulance." The drive to the hospital was a blur of fear and desperate prayers. Sam drifted in and out of consciousness, his breathing shallow and irregular. In the back seat, Emma held his hand while Ethan drove with the steady competence that had become second nature to him. "Stay with us, Dad," Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We need you. We're not ready to lose you." At the hospital, Dr. Wilson's expression was grave as he delivered the diagnosis. Sam's heart was failing, weakened by decades of hard work and stress, and complicated by a genetic condition that had gone undetected until now. "How long?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's hard to say," Dr. Wilson replied carefully. "With treatment, maybe 2 years. Maybe less. The heart is severely damaged, and at his age, surgical options are limited." The twins sat in stunned silence, holding each other's hands as they absorbed the reality that their father, the man who had seemed invincible their entire lives, was dying. Over the next few days, as Sam stabilized enough to come home, the family had to confront decisions they'd never imagined making. The ranch required constant attention, and Sam's condition meant he could no longer handle the physical demands of the work. They would need help, or they would need to sell. "I won't be the reason this place falls apart," Sam said during a family meeting in the living room where they'd shared so many evening conversations. "Maybe it's time to consider our options." "What options?" Ethan asked sharply. "This is our home. This is where we belong." "Son, being practical isn't giving up," Sam replied gently. "The ranch is too much for your mother to manage alone, and you two have your own lives to build. You've got college offers, chances to see the world beyond Copper Falls." "I don't want to see the world beyond Copper Falls," Ethan said fiercely. "I want to save this place. I want to keep what you and Mom built." Emma had been quiet during the discussion, but now she spoke up. "What if we didn't have to choose? What if there was a way to keep the ranch and still honor the opportunities we've been given?" All eyes turned to her, and she took a deep breath before continuing. "I've been thinking about this since Dad got sick. My scholarship is for journalism, right? But what if I combined that with photography and focused on agricultural journalism? I could study ranch management as a minor, learn the business side while still pursuing my artistic interests." She turned to Ethan. "And you don't need to go to Colorado to learn ranch management. You've been learning it your whole life. What if you stayed and took over the day-to-day operations while I handled the marketing and promotional side? We could modernize the operation, maybe add agritourism, or partner with local restaurants for farm-to-table programs." Sarah and Sam exchanged glances, seeing the determination in their children's faces, the way they were already problem-solving as a team. "That's a big sacrifice," Sam said carefully. "College is important. The experiences you'd have, the people you'd meet." "Dad," Emma interrupted gently, "you and Mom sacrificed everything to give us a home and a family. This isn't sacrifice, it's choice. We're choosing to stay because this is where we want to be. Besides," Ethan added with a slight smile, "someone needs to keep Emma from turning the cattle into photography models." Despite the gravity of the COVID situation, the joke earned a weak chuckle from Sam, but his expression quickly grew serious again. "I need you both to understand what you're committing to," he said. "This isn't just about keeping the ranch running. It's about taking care of your mother when I'm gone. It's about preserving something that's been built over decades. It's about becoming the heads of this family while you're still practically children yourselves." "We're not children anymore," Emma said softly. "You and Mom made sure of that. You raised us to be responsible, to understand what matters, to put family first. We're not staying out of obligation, we're staying because this is who we are." The decision was made that night, though it would take months to work out all the details. Emma deferred her scholarship for a year to help with the transition, planning to attend the University of Montana part-time while living at home. Ethan officially took over as ranch foreman, though he'd been doing much of the work already. But more than the practical arrangements, something deeper had shifted in the family dynamic. The twins were no longer children looking to their parents for guidance. They were adults stepping up to protect and preserve what their parents had built. Sam's condition gradually worsened over the following months, but he was able to see the ranch not just surviving, but thriving under his children's management. Emma's marketing ideas brought new customers and higher prices for their beef, while Ethan's innovations in pasture management increased productivity while reducing costs. More importantly, Sam could see that his children had found their calling. This wasn't a sacrifice they were making out of duty, it was the life they wanted to build, the legacy they wanted to continue. "I'm proud of you," he told them one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a ritual they'd maintained, even as his health declined. "Not just for what you're doing for the ranch, but for who you've become. You're good people, and that's the most important thing your mother and I could have given you." Emma leaned against his shoulder, careful not to put too much weight on his frail frame. "You gave us everything, Dad. A home, a family, a place to belong. We're just trying to live up to that gift." As autumn settled over the Montana plains, painting the landscape in shades of gold and crimson, the Mitchell family faced the future with the same courage and determination that had carried them through every challenge. Sam's time was limited, but his legacy was secure, not just in the land he'd worked or the cattle he'd raised, but in the children he'd chosen to love and who had chosen to love him back. The greatest test of their family bond was yet to come, but they would face it together as they always had. And in the end, that would make all the difference. Sam Mitchell passed away on a crisp October morning, 20 years to the day after he'd found two tiny babies crying in a snowstorm. He died peacefully in his sleep with Sarah holding his hand, and the twins keeping vigil beside his bed. His last words, whispered to Emma the evening before, were, "Take care of each other. That's all that matters." The viewing at Morrison's funeral home stretched over 2 days, with lines of people waiting to pay their respects extending around the block. Ranchers drove in from as far as Wyoming and North Dakota, their weathered faces solemn as they filed past the casket. Sarah was amazed to meet people she'd never heard of, who shared stories of Sam's quiet kindnesses, loans he'd made without expecting repayment, help he'd given during difficult calving seasons, advice he'd offered to young ranchers just starting out. "Your husband saved our ranch back in '94, a woman named Carol Peterson told Sarah during the viewing. "We'd lost half our herd to disease, and the bank was ready to foreclose. Sam showed up one day with a check and said it was an early payment for cattle he wanted to buy in the spring. We knew it wasn't true. He was just helping without making us feel like charity cases. We never forgot that kindness. Emma listened to story after story, documenting them in her mind like the natural historian she'd become. Each tale revealed another facet of the man who had raised her, showing her that his generosity hadn't been reserved for his family alone. Sam Mitchell had been quietly supporting his entire community for decades, his influence rippling outward in ways none of them had fully understood. The funeral was held at the Methodist Church in Copper Falls, but the building couldn't contain everyone who came to pay their respects. The church seated 300, but nearly 600 people attended, filling the pews, standing along the walls, and gathering in the churchyard where speakers had been set up to carry the service. Outside, they came not because Sam Mitchell had been famous or wealthy, but because he had been good a man who had lived his values quietly and consistently for 70 years. Emma delivered the eulogy, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. She'd spent days writing and rewriting her remarks, trying to capture the essence of a man who had changed so many lives through simple acts of love and commitment. "My father taught us that family isn't about sharing DNA," she said, looking out at the packed church and the faces pressed against the windows. "It's about sharing your life. It's about showing up every day, through good times and bad, and choosing to love each other no matter what. He showed up for us every single day for 20 years, and we were blessed to be able to show up for him at the end." She paused, her voice catching slightly as she continued. 20 years ago, my father made a choice that changed 4 lives forever. He could have driven past that stranded car in the blizzard. He could have called for help and stayed warm in his house. Instead, he got out in the storm and saved 2 babies he'd never met, along with a young woman who had nowhere else to turn. That choice, that single moment of deciding to help instead of turning away, created everything that followed. Emma's eyes found Sarah in the front pew, then moved to Ethan beside her. "Dad used to say that the best things in life come disguised as problems. A blizzard brought us together. A custody battle made us stronger. Hard times taught us what really mattered. He showed us that every challenge is an opportunity to choose love over fear, hope over despair, action over indifference." She gestured toward the crowd. "Look around this church. Every person here has a story about how Sam Mitchell touched their life. He never sought recognition for his kindness, never kept score of his good deeds. He just lived his values every single day, and the result is this: a community that came together to honor a man who made us all better by his example." As Emma concluded her remarks, she felt a profound sense of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Sam's legacy wasn't just the ranch or the family he'd built, it was the example he'd set, the standard of character he'd established. Now it was up to her and Ethan to carry that forward. The burial took place at Copper Falls Cemetery, on a hillside overlooking the valley where Sam had spent most of his life. As the casket was lowered into the ground, Sarah placed a handful of dirt from the ranch on top of its soil that Sam had worked with his own hands, earth that had sustained his family and his dreams. After the reception, as the last guests departed, and the family returned to the ranch, an overwhelming silence settled over the house. For 20 years, Sam's presence had filled every room, his quiet strength anchoring them all. Now that anchor was gone, and they had to learn how to navigate without him. The months following Sam's death were difficult in ways the family hadn't anticipated. The grief was expected, but the responsibility of running the ranch without his guidance felt overwhelming at times. Sam had been involved in every decision, from which pastures to use for spring grazing to how to handle difficult cattle buyers. His absence created a vacuum that no one could fill completely. Ethan struggled with the weight of being the man of the family at just 19. The ranch hands looked to him for direction, but there were moments when he felt like he was pretending. to know more than he actually did. There were nights when he'd lie awake worrying about decisions he'd made during the day, wondering if his father would have handled things differently. "I called Jim Henderson about the hay contract today," he told Sarah one evening over dinner. "But I keep thinking Dad would have negotiated a better price." "Your father made plenty of mistakes when he was learning," Sarah replied gently. "The difference is that he didn't have anyone watching his every move, comparing him to someone else. You're doing fine, Ethan. Better than fine." Emma threw herself into her studies and her photography, often working late into the night editing photos or writing articles for agricultural publications. She'd found her niche in documenting the changing face of modern ranching, and her work was gaining recognition beyond Montana. Agricultural magazines were publishing her photo essays, and she'd received inquiries from publishers interested in a book about contemporary ranch life, but success felt hollow without Sam there to see it. Emma would find herself reaching for the phone to share good news with him, only to remember with fresh pain that he was gone. The photography studio she'd set up in the old tack room felt like a sanctuary and a prison, simultaneously a place where she could work through her grief, but also where his absence felt most acute. Sarah struggled most of all. After 20 years of marriage, she'd lost not just her husband, but her partner in every aspect of life. The ranch had been their shared project, their joint legacy, and now she had to navigate widowhood while supporting her grieving children and maintaining the operation that had been the center of their world. She found herself talking to Sam's empty chair at the kitchen table, sharing the day's events with someone who could no longer respond. The first winter without Sam was particularly brutal. A series of storms in January brought temperatures down to 30 below zero for 2 weeks straight, testing both the family's endurance and their ability to keep the cattle alive without Sam's experienced guidance. They lost some animals, not unusual in such extreme weather, but each death felt like a personal failure, a sign that they weren't capable of maintaining what he'd built. It was during one of these dark periods, about 6 months after Sam's death, that something unexpected happened that would change the trajectory of their grieving and their future. Emma was in town picking up supplies at Morrison's General Store when she noticed a commotion at the bank across the street. A small crowd had gathered outside, and she could hear raised voices through the open doors. Her journalist's instincts kicked in, and she approached to investigate what was happening. She recognized the bank manager, Mr. Patterson, looking harried. As he spoke with an elderly Asian woman Emma didn't recognize. The woman was small and dignified, probably in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and clothes that spoke of careful maintenance rather than new purchases. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Chun, but the bank's position is firm," Patterson was saying, his voice carrying the tired authority of someone who'd had this conversation many times before. "The loan is overdue, and we have to foreclose. The property will be auctioned next month." The woman, who Patterson had called Mrs. Chun, was clearly distraught but trying to maintain her composure. She clutched a handful of papers in one hand and a worn leather purse in the other, speaking with a slight accent that Emma couldn't place. "Please, Mr. Patterson, I just need more time. My son, he sent money from California, but the wire transfer, it take longer than expected. Just 1 more week, please. I have been customer of this bank for 15 years. Patterson shook his head with the cold efficiency of someone who'd made peace with delivering bad news. "Mrs. Chun, you've had extensions already. The bank has been more than patient. My hands are tied. This decision comes from the corporate office." Emma found herself stepping forward before she'd consciously made the decision. "Excuse me," she said politely, her voice carrying the quiet authority she'd inherited from Sam. "I couldn't help but overhear what seems to be the problem." Patterson looked surprised to see her. "Miss Mitchell, this really isn't your concern. How much is the loan for?" Emma interrupted, her tone leaving no room for dismissal. Mrs. Chun looked at Emma with desperate hope. recognizing something in her face that suggested genuine concern rather than mere curiosity. $15,000, she said, her voice breaking slightly. I own the old Miller place east of town. My husband and we buy it 30 years ago to raise chickens and grow vegetables. But then he gets sick, then he died last year, and I can't keep up with payments. The medical bills, they take everything we save. Emma's heart clenched at the familiar story of hardship and loss. She knew the Miller place, a modest farm with a small house and several outbuildings. Nothing fancy but clearly maintained with pride. She could picture an elderly couple working that land for decades, building something together only to have it threatened by circumstances beyond their control. My son, he have good job in Los Angeles, Mrs. Chun continued, tears beginning to flow despite her efforts to maintain dignity. He try to help, but he have his own family, his own expenses. He send what he can, but it not enough to catch up. $15,000. It was a significant sum for most people in Copper Falls, but not insurmountable for the Mitchell Ranch, especially with the successful year they'd had under Ethan's management and Emma's marketing efforts. More importantly, it was exactly the kind of situation where Sam would have stepped in without hesitation. I'll cover it, Emma said simply, pulling out her checkbook. The crowd fell silent. Patterson stared at her in disbelief, his professional composure cracking. Miss Mitchell, you can't be serious. That's a substantial amount of money, and you barely know this woman. I'm completely serious, Emma replied, writing the check with steady hands. And I know enough. Mrs. Chen is a member of our community who needs help, and I'm in a position to provide it. She handed the check to Patterson, whose amazement was evident despite his attempts to maintain professional decorum. This covers the full amount, plus any late fees and penalties. Mrs. Chun can repay me when her son's money arrives, if she chooses to. No interest, no deadline, no pressure. Mrs. Chun burst into tears, reaching out to grasp Emma's hands. Why? You do this for stranger? You don't even know me. Emma felt Sam's presence strongly in that moment, almost as if he were standing beside her, approving of her choice. My father taught me that there are no strangers, only neighbors we haven't met yet. He always said that we help each other because that's what communities do. As the crowd dispersed and Mrs. Chun tearfully thanked Emma repeatedly, Patterson pulled her aside with obvious concern. That was very generous but also very risky, he said quietly. What if she can't repay you? What if this is some kind of scam? Emma looked at him with the same steady gaze that Sam had always used when someone questioned his judgment about helping others. Then she can't repay me, and I'll survive the loss. Mr. Patterson, some things are more important than money. My father understood that, and I'm trying to live by his example. Word of Emma's gesture spread quickly through Copper Falls, as news always did in small towns. By evening, it had reached the ranch where Sarah was waiting with questions and understandable concerns about such a large expenditure. Emma, honey, I understand the impulse to help, Sarah said as they sat at the kitchen table after dinner. But $15,000, that's a significant portion of our emergency fund. What if we have a crisis of our own? Emma had been expecting this conversation and had spent the drive home from town thinking about how to explain her actions. Mom, the ranch is doing well, better than it ever has. Ethan's innovations have increased our productivity and my marketing. Work has brought in new customers at higher prices. We have the money, and we can afford to help. She paused, meeting her mother's eyes directly. But more than that, Dad always said that success means nothing if you don't use it to help others. How many times did he help families in this community without even telling us about it? I found out at his funeral that he'd been quietly supporting people for years. Sarah studied her daughter's face, seeing so much of Sam in her determined expression, in the way she held her shoulders when she'd made a decision she believed in. What if she can't pay you back? Then we'll have helped someone keep their home, Emma replied without hesitation. We'll have honored Dad's memory by living his values. And we'll sleep well at night, knowing we did the right thing when we had the chance. It was true, and Sarah knew it. Sam had quietly helped numerous families over the years, often without even telling Sarah about it until after the fact. She'd only learned about some of his generosity after his death, when grateful people had shared stories at his funeral. The check Emma had written was large, but it was exactly what Sam would have done in the same situation. 3 days later, Mrs. Chun appeared at their door with an envelope containing $15,000 in cash and a large covered dish that smelled wonderful. "My son's money come through yesterday," she said, beaming with relief and gratitude. "I pay you back everything, like I promise. But I also bring you dinner traditional Chinese dumplings and vegetables from my garden. I can never repay the kindness you show me, but I try to say thank you proper way." The dinner Mrs. Chun had prepared was delicious delicate dumplings filled with pork and vegetables, stir-fried greens with garlic, and a soup that warmed them from the inside out. But more than the food, Mrs. Chun brought stories that opened up a whole new perspective on their community. She had immigrated to Montana in the 1970s with her husband, seeking the same opportunities that had drawn countless families to the American West. They'd worked multiple jobs, he as a mechanic and farm laborer, she as a seamstress and house cleaner, saving every penny to buy their small farm. They'd raised chickens, grown vegetables, and slowly built a life that felt secure and prosperous by their modest standards. "We never have much money," Mrs. Shade explained as they sat around the kitchen table after dinner. "But we have each other. We have our land, we have purpose. When my husband gets sick with cancer, we spend everything on treatments. After he die, I think maybe I lose everything we build together." She looked at Emma with tears in her eyes. "Your father, he was good. Man, when my husband in hospital, Mr. Sam come to our place, help me fix chicken coop that get damaged in storm. He never ask for money, never make me feel like charity case. He just fix it and say neighbors help neighbors." Emma felt her throat tighten at this revelation of yet another kindness her father had performed without mentioning it to his family. "He never told us about that. He never tell anyone, I think. That kind of man, he was do good things quiet, not for praise, but because it right thing to do." "You have same heart, Emma, same spirit." Over the following weeks, Mrs. Chun became a regular visitor to the ranch. She brought fresh vegetables from her garden, eggs from her chickens, and traditional Chinese dishes that added wonderful variety to their meals. More importantly, she brought friendship and a connection to a wider world of experiences that enriched their understanding of their own community. Mrs. Chun's gratitude extended beyond simple visits and shared meals. She began telling other members of the local Chinese community about Emma's kindness, and word spread to other immigrant families who had settled in the region. Soon, Emma found herself invited to photograph a Chinese New Year celebration, then a traditional wedding, then a harvest festival that combined American and Chinese customs in fascinating ways. "I never knew about any of this," Emma told her mother as she developed photographs from a community gathering. "All these families, all these traditions right here in Copper Falls, and I never knew they existed." The experience broadened Emma's perspective on her photography and journalism work. She began documenting not just traditional ranch life, but the diverse communities that made up modern rural Montana. Her photo essays about immigrant families and agriculture were picked up by national magazines, and she received inquiries from publishers interested in a book about the changing demographics of the American West. But more than professional recognition, Emma's work was creating connections within the community that hadn't existed before. The Chinese New Year celebration the following year included families from the traditional ranching community for the first time, and several local ranchers hired immigrants who had been struggling to find work that matched their skills. The observation Mrs. Chun had made about Emma carrying Sam's spirit proved prophetic in ways none of them had anticipated. As word spread about Emma's generosity and her family's willingness to help, Other people began approaching the Mitchell family with stories of need. Some came directly, hat in hand and pride swallowed, asking for help they desperately needed. Others were brought to their attention by mutual friends who knew both the families in need and the Mitchells' capacity to help. There was the young couple facing crushing medical bills after their premature baby spent 4 months in intensive care. The husband worked construction and the wife cleaned houses, but the medical expenses were beyond anything their insurance would cover. Emma and Ethan quietly arranged for the medical debt to be paid, asking only that the couple consider passing along help to someone else when they were in a position to do so. A military veteran struggling with PTSD was about to lose his small ranch-to-tax debt, the result of missed payments during a period when his mental health had made it impossible for him to function normally. Ethan hired him as a part-time ranch hand, providing both income and the therapeutic value of working with animals, while Sarah helped him navigate the bureaucracy to get the mental health services he needed. An elderly man whose house needed major repairs he couldn't afford found the work mysteriously completed one weekend while he was visiting his daughter in Billings. The local hardware store had been paid for all materials, and a crew of volunteers had donated their time, organized by Emma through her growing network of community connections. In each case, the help was provided discreetly, without fanfare or publicity. Emma and Ethan had learned from their father's example that the most meaningful charity is done quietly, preserving the dignity of those being helped while meeting genuine needs. "We're not a charity," I then said one evening as they discussed their latest request for help, a single mother whose car had broken down and who couldn't afford repairs that would allow her to keep her job in town. "But we're also not just a business. We're part of this community, and communities take care of each other." Their approach was always thoughtful and strategic. They didn't just hand out money. They looked for ways to address root causes of problems while empowering people to regain their independence. Sometimes that meant providing direct financial assistance. Sometimes it meant creating job opportunities. And sometimes it meant connecting people with resources and services they didn't know existed. Sarah found herself becoming involved in ways she hadn't expected. Her experience managing the ranch's finances proved valuable in helping other families create budgets and financial plans. Her knowledge of local resources, built up over 20 years of community involvement, made her an informal social worker who could guide people to appropriate help. "I never thought I'd be doing marriage counseling in my kitchen," she told Emma one evening after spending 2 hours helping a young couple work through financial stress that was threatening their relationship. "But somehow word got out that I'm good at helping people figure out their problems." A year after Sam's death, Emma received an unexpected phone call that would bring their family story full circle in a way none of them could have anticipated. "Miss Mitchell, this is Governor Reynolds' office. The governor would like to invite you to Helena for a special ceremony." Emma listened in amazement as the caller explained that she'd been selected as Montana's Young Citizen of the Year for her work documenting rural life and her community service. The award came with a substantial scholarship fund that would allow her to complete her education while continuing her work at the ranch, plus recognition at the state level that would bring attention to her photography and journalism. The governor was particularly impressed by the nominating letters, the caller continued. "We received over 200 letters from community members describing your family's impact on Copper Falls and the surrounding area. It's unprecedented for someone so young to receive this level of community support." The award ceremony was held in the state capitol building in Helena, with Emma wearing her mother's best dress and carrying a small photo of Sam in her purse for luck. As she walked up to receive the honor from Governor Reynolds, she thought about the night 20 years ago, when a lonely rancher had heard crying in a blizzard and made the choice to help. That single act of kindness had created ripples that were still spreading, touching lives Sam had never even known about. The babies he'd saved had grown into adults who were now saving others, passing on the gifts they'd received in an endless cycle of generosity and community support. "This award doesn't belong to me," Emma said in her acceptance speech, looking out at an audience that included her family, Mrs. Chen, and dozens of other community members who had made the trip to Helena. "It belongs to my father, Sam Mitchell, who taught me that the measure of a life isn't what you achieve for yourself, but what you give to others. It belongs to my mother, Sarah, who showed me that strength comes from love, not from being unbreakable. And it belongs to my brother, Ethan, who proves every day that the most important legacy we can leave is the example we set for others." She paused, her voice gaining strength as she continued. 20 years ago, my father made a choice that seemed simple at the time. He helped 2 babies and their mother survive a blizzard. But that choice created everything that followed. It created a family, it created a community, it created a way of living that believes in helping each other rather than just helping ourselves. Emma gestured toward the audience. Everyone in this room has been touched by that original act of kindness, whether they know it or not. The help we've been able to provide to others, the connections we've built, the community we've strengthened, it all traces back to one man's decision to get out of his warm house on a cold night and save 3 strangers. As Emma returned home, to the ranch, to the land where she'd been raised and where she'd chosen to build her future, she felt Sam's presence more strongly than she had since his death. He was there in the wind across the plains, in the sound of cattle settling for the night, in the warmth of the house where he'd loved them into the people they'd become. The twins Sam had found in a snowstorm had indeed repaid his kindness, not through any single grand gesture, but through a lifetime of choices. They'd chosen to stay when they could have left. They'd chosen to help when they could have looked away. They'd chosen to honor the values he'd taught them, not just in words, but in actions that created positive change throughout their community. And in doing so, they'd ensured that Sam Mitchell's greatest gift, the gift of unconditional love, would continue to spread far beyond anything he could have imagined on that cold night when he'd heard 2 babies crying in the storm. Some rescues, Emma reflected, as she watched the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson, save more than just the people involved. Sometimes they save entire communities, entire ways of being in the world. Sometimes they create legacies that outlast any individual life, touching generations in ways that can never be fully measured or understood. Sam had rescued 2 babies from a blizzard 20 years ago. But in the end, perhaps they had rescued him too from loneliness, from despair, from a life without purpose. They'd rescued each other, and in doing so, had learned the most important lesson of all, that love given freely always finds its way back, multiplied beyond measure, creating endless possibilities for grace in an often harsh and unforgiving world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.